Welcome. This is Sabrina Monarch bringing you the astrology forecast for November 4th to November 10th, 2020. So remember, these are always written forecasts at monarchastrology.com, and I come to YouTube and to my podcast, Magic of the Spheres, to share video and audio versions with you and add a few extra comments about what I've written. So this week we have a few main events. We have Mercury now direct in Libra, squaring Saturn for the third time. We have Venus in Libra opposite Mars retrograde in Aries. We have the Sun in Scorpio trine Neptune in Pisces. And we have Mercury re-entering Scorpio. So one of the ones that caught my attention the most is the Venus-Mars opposition. It's a definite feel, a definite mood whenever we have Venus-Mars aspects. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you my slides if you're watching the video. So Venus and Mars form an opposition this week, each in their home signs. That's Venus in Libra. Venus rules Libra and Taurus. And we have Mars in its home sign of Aries. So Venus-Mars contacts, as I was saying, are significantly felt experiences. They're personal planets, after all. Venus and Mars, they relate to, the personality in some sense in a natal chart, but it also, it relates to the feminine and the masculine and the interplay of those energies. It relates to Venus being how we love, what we value, and Mars being how we pursue what we value, or how we create separation and sever from that which we are repelled by or that which we are averse to. So these are kind of daily life dynamics. But whenever we have Venus-Mars contacts, sometimes the conversation in the collective really veers toward conflicts between the sexes, usually traditional like male-female stuff, like Me Too kind of stuff, or just like gender issues coming up in conversation. And so I'll be curious to see how this goes with Venus and Mars in their home signs. That feels like so, like they're each kind of very much in their essence. So we may feel this transit through our relationships really directly, or at least our inner orientation to the relationships that we have or that we wish to have. And by that inner orientation, I mean, how do you navigate having sentiments or feelings towards someone? Do you have a process of contemplating within yourself if you are going to reach out and how you're going to reach out? Maybe you just impulsively express how you feel. But if there's that process of tuning into, how you want to go about creating that connection, that is a very Venus-Mars dynamic. And Venus-Mars, when they come together, there can really be a sense of taking action on these feelings or taking action on how we desire another person. So love has always existed side by side with conflict, from the courage that it takes to open the heart, the question of how to navigate the guarding of the heart, the clashing wills and conflicts and negotiations that we have with people that we're connected with or people that we are connected with, but maybe in a negative way, like even enemies are relationships. There's also the way of being called forward to a better version of ourselves and having to face our blind spots when we're in connection with other people. Relationships are a spiritual path for that reason. It's gonna bring stuff up. At another level, Venus and Mars always coexist in many other phenomena. Take, for example, the way that anger, so typical Mars association, is connected to knowing what we value and desire, which is a Venus association. The less preference that we have, the more go with the flow that we are, and therefore like not easily angered until enough is enough, perhaps, someone who seems chill until they blow up. Yeah, if we don't have those preferences, then we're kind of more open to whatever happens, versus when we're pretty sure about what we want, we're either going to um, have a way of just kind of having routinely had those boundaries and those preferences such that things kind of go along with that um, preference, or we encounter situations of conflict where we're interacting with what we don't want. And this is, I think, there can be a correlation between, like, say, job interviews and the dating process, where there's that sense of sussing out, is this a fit? Do I like this? Do I like the way that we connect? Do I see myself in this workplace? And that if we're not totally sure what we want, then there's this kind of trial and error in figuring it out, versus when we're really firm about what our values are, there may be certain a knowing of, like, I'm not really feeling this. I'm not going to go on the date, or this is not the job I want. I'm not going to pursue getting an interview. Um, Versus when you're just experimental and open and you're like, I'll try this out. Mars also, Venus invites lessons of self-worth and knowing just who we are. And with that knowledge, we can properly defend and protect that. Mars invites lessons of courage and force, so how much to use and how much not to use. So a little personal share along these themes. In my past, personally, I have tended toward more indulgence when it comes to Venusian peacemaking. I have Venus in Pisces on my ascendant. And it's taken me significant inner work and support to learn how to be more confrontational and how to make requests in relationship. I used to associate conflict as a potential way of losing connection. And so I would avoid these things that I thought would cause the loss of the connection. But in so doing, if don't speak up about how you feel, or if you have requests, then it can turn into resentment or unhappiness without giving the other person the opportunity to meet you. And now that I've been able to clear this belief significantly that conflict is a way of losing love, I have become mesmerized, quite honestly, by watching fight scenes between romantic protagonists in movies. Like, I watch them carefully, like I'm getting some kind of download from it. I'm mesmerized by friends of mine who are maybe more adept at confrontation and how they go about confrontation in their lives, or how they bring that to me, and how our connection grows and how I love them more. I'm also mesmerized by people supporting me in confronting them and being on my team in that process. It's interesting, when it comes to, like, reading books about relationship. One of the last ones that I was reading, which I've talked about here, which is Communication Miracles for Couples. It talks about, how to have conversations without getting defensive, or how to, not create blame. And I think that that's such a Venus Mars thing, where it's like, there's a disagreement here, there's some tension, but how can we relate together with this tension, versus getting so reactive that the connection breaks. So it's in this spirit, this more recent, and not incredibly recent, but like a little span of time here of contemplating this, but especially, as this transit is approaching, I'm finding that lesson or that theme coming up again. So in this spirit, considering Venus and Mars opposite this week, I have a newly embodied appreciation for the nature of conflict in relationship as a potential source, not a hindrance to connection. And if we remember that Venus and Mars have a special connection, and that they're very different, but they are very connected, so there's a dialectic here. We can mediate or meditate. Mediate is kind of a Venusian word too. We can meditate on how this shows up in our life, this Venus-Mars dialectic, and who is given more of a voice, and at what cost. Could their connection play out in a more vibrant and dynamic way? And by saying, who is given more of a voice, there's a way that there can be teamwork between Venus and Mars, and there's also ways that either energy can dominate the other. And that dynamic can show up in relationship, and it can also show up internally in terms of how we overdo one of the planets or neglect one of them. So it's this balance between, creating connection, creating those bridges, Venus, and the divisive or more conflict oriented side of Mars, and how those two do coexist in connected relationship. So before we get into our week in more detail, here's a few announcements. One is that I have a mailing list, and this is one of the best ways to stay in touch with me. I send you a weekly forecast every week. I also announce my courses and when my books open. So I'm going to leave the link for that in the notes. And also, I love connecting on Instagram. You can find me there at Sabrina Monarch. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like this video and comment. Let me know what you think, how this reaches you, how your week is going. I love to hear from you. So I have an evolutionary astrology intensive coming up January 11th, and it will go from January 11th to April 21st, 2021. I've been teaching this course for around like 3 years now, and it's been amazing. It's a foundational course for understanding the language of evolutionary astrology and the methodology of how to interpret charts from the perspective of the soul as this being who has reincarnated multiple times and has many lifetimes ahead, and locating ourselves on this evolutionary journey. What did we bring into this life at a very subconscious level, our soul memory, our deeper kind of patterns, and what are we evolving into and moving toward in this life? Not only is this astrology, and we'll go over the archetypes of the planets and the signs and learn aspects and aspect theory and how to put together a whole chart analysis. Not only is it that, but astrology or evolutionary astrology is really a wisdom school. All of the teachings that go along with the archetypes have this wisdom to it, I've found. And I also have been getting the reflection lately from people who tune in either to the podcast or students or peers telling me that I have a compassionate perspective, which reaches me really well, because when it comes to how I interpret charts and how I look at all the signs, I'm looking for their divinity and what makes them beautiful in their own right. And I really feel that working with the natal chart is learning how to relate to ourselves in a deeper way. So I really love giving people this foundational skill set to have a deeper relationship with astrology and with themselves as a result. So if you enjoy these forecasts, or you enjoy the podcast, or both, I think that you'll really love this course. And I designed it to really be like a juicy experience in of itself, but to really be like a support for you to study astrology for the rest of your life. Like, I love helping people attune to their own astrological intuition and to feel their archetypal eye, their ability to recognize and feel the archetypes really open up. So I'm going to leave the link for this in the notes, and you can enroll and read more about it and read student testimonials there. I have a new program as well called Meteorite, and this is an astrological embodiment accelerator. This will start in January as well and is a 9-month container. It is for alumni of the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive. I will make some consideration for anyone who has experience with evolutionary astrology. But this program does have an application, and it's a deep dive into going farther into the evolutionary astrology material, working with clients, so chart volunteers, working with our own charts in a deeper way and our transits. So there will be new curriculum, but also the intention of this program is to help you cultivate your own unique voice as an astrologer. So that astrological embodiment piece. And at the end of this program, everyone who takes part will create a work of astrological scholarship or art to share with everyone in the class. So this is really for people that want to like really be devoted to their astrology practice. As a professional astrologer, part of that job or part of being a astrologer, and I mean really being an astrologer, like it is who you are, there's training that goes into it. There's devotion. You train on your craft. So I wanted to create a container where we can do that in community and really create a lot of magic. So it's going to be, a continued curriculum, as I was saying. So we're going to get into those technical pieces, but it's also going to be a really imaginative and enchanted and fun space. So I'm leaving the link for that as well in the notes if you'd like to apply. Alumni welcome. Got a few more announcements and then we'll start. So my astrology reading bookings are currently closed. I will announce when they're open again to my mailing list, but I am still taking new clients for ongoing mentorship and coaching, which is a 6-month or 1-year commitment. So if you're interested in working with me in that capacity, because I do combine astrology, as I was saying earlier, with like wisdom teachings, and it's a spiritual practice, and I work a lot with empowerment and mindset work and shifting beliefs, and doing that side by side with astrology. So if you have a process that you're wanting to deepen into or receive insight and guidance with, I would love to support you in that way. So if you want to set up a consultation call with me, you can send me an email at sabrina@monarchastrology.com. And I would appreciate knowing a little bit about you and what calls you to the mentorship, if you want to share some of those things in the email. No new episode of Magic of the Spheres podcast this week, except, of course, this forecast. But I'll be back soon with some more content. I have some exciting things coming. Okay, here's our week. On November 6th, Mercury in 26 degrees of Libra will square Saturn in 26 degrees of Capricorn. Mercury square Saturn at 1:12 a.m. Pacific. And now that Mercury is direct, this is the third and final pass of this particular square. So remember too that we have Mercury square Saturn, that's the one that's exact, but Saturn is still part of this triple conjunction with Jupiter and Pluto. So let's take that into account. While the Jupiter-Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn might tend toward greater extremism and holding a perspective with this just the way things are energy, this argument over energy, this slamming the gavel energy, Mercury in Libra brings in a weighing in of alternatives. Libra wants to be well-rounded and balanced. We know that balance is like the Libra stereotype, but it's also true. So Mercury in Libra is going to bring in that energy and preferring a more well-rounded approach. So perhaps you may relate to certain moments where you held a really extreme conviction about something, only to reverse your judgment in the coming days or weeks or maybe even years. Even though the extremity of the conviction wasn't meant to last forever, did it grant you some clarity and direction? I'm fascinated by this because of the quality of truth being like a river, where you put your foot in a river and it's not the same river every single second. It keeps changing. And so there can be something, we can arrive at this moment where we're just convicted of something, and then it changes. And sometimes it's that energy of conviction, when it's true, not forcing it or anything, that actually is part of the cycle of the flow of reality. And it's just interesting to watch that phenomenon of being so sure about something only to change your mind. This square of Mercury and Saturn marks the last quarter phase of their cycle together. So all of the planetary pairs have phases like the sun and the moon. It's amazing. It adds so much depth at an interpretive angle, and I include this in the EA intensive. But this last quarter phase has associations with crisis in consciousness and breakthrough or paradigm shift. So for us, we might be reinterpreting our personal history, realizing that through whatever blind spots that we necessarily possessed, hindsight 2020, there's more to the story than we previously considered. And I love this photo. At some level, the Libra Capricorn square dynamic can be quite judgmental. You know, they both have really judgmental tendencies. We often pass judgment in unexamined ways. So we have a judgment and we don't really label it as a judgment. We don't question it. We don't acknowledge that it's a judgment. We just consider it fact instead, even though it is a bias. But the more cognizant we are of the nature of judgment and the energy of judgment and being able to discern when we're judging, it's not to say don't judge, because we inevitably are always judging. I remember having like a philosophical, I used to live with people that I went to a philosophy degree program with. So we would have these really cool philosophical conversations at home, but we were talking about judgment. And my friend was saying, we're always judging. When I'm shooting a basketball into the hoop, I'm judging the distance between the ball and the hoop. Like judgment is it just is. But I think that awareness and that self-consciousness that judging is happening is a whole different layer than just judging and being like, yeah, this is fact. So if we notice it, we have the opportunity to tune into whether our perceptions are keen and truthful and necessary, or whether we are projecting in an unnecessary or unhelpful way. And further, if we stand by our assessment, so we don't just, talk ourselves out of our own judgments because we don't want to be judgmental, but like when you're like, yeah, I feel good about this assessment. Are we then judging to punish? Or do we judge to make necessary adjustment and restore harmony and balance into our lives? November 9th, we have that Venus opposite Mars transit that I was talking about at the start. So it's Venus in 15 degrees of Libra, opposite Mars retrograde in 15 degrees of Aries at 8:08 a.m. Pacific. And for this, I wanted to share a quote from my friend Cameron. He said, "Mars and Venus belong together. A lot of heart medicine carries thorns. The magic that love is inherently must be protected from those who reach out carelessly." Motherwort Rose Hawthorne. He just dropped this on Twitter. I was like, this is profound. Oops. Okay. Stay on this slide. One can reflect on the dynamic between Venus and Mars by studying traditional feminine masculine dynamics. And we're speaking here both of the actual energies behind and beyond social conditioning, as well as how humans fit into the paradigm of feminine and masculine. So we can study these dynamics and the chemistry that exists here, whether it's really hot or things have gone awry, or are the energies synergistic. Gender conversations that highlight the polarity are basically Venus-Mars meditations in disguise, or, not astrologically. I love with astrology, combining it with other things. I love to read and absorb different streams of information and find the astrological connections. But for Venus-Mars, think like David Data or Mama Gina. That's Regina Thomas Shower, I think is her last name. or any discourse about divine masculine and divine feminine. And I understand that these conversations are not universally appreciated, um, but I do find them compelling. I find the blend of conventional gender expression and like analyzing how much of that is like natural or natural to certain people that identify with that or kind of are more conventional in that way versus where is it, social conditioning that has been damaging or unhelpful, but what's the core? So what's the divine, energy there? Um, Combining that with some like reimagined divine or exalted expressions, I find this conversation really interesting. It's like a new and more conscientious wave of gender expression and even gender conformity, right? For people who identify with the binary. And I think it's a really interesting inner negotiation too, because I think that especially this new wave of this conversation gives space to there being a inner masculine and inner feminine and like this blending of them. So you can be like a very masculine woman or a very feminine man, or have like a strong feminine or a strong masculine, and figuring out how you navigate that. What's your true expression of that? So I like these conversations. Um, and I find that when I bring them back to astrology and think about Venus and Mars, that it teaches me about those planets continually, even though these conversations are talking about humans and human relationships. So, one dynamic that can come up with strong Venus Mars contacts is a fiery willingness to defend what is valued. The mood is like a dramatic argument where honest words are spoken and the discontented or angry person like walks away or storms away. There was no subtlety, no fawning. And so fawning is a trauma response where you just try to be nice. No trying to make nice here. And often this honesty and anger can work to build more connection, even though the outburst as an instance is so separative. There are really countless film scenes that play on this theme, but I'm going to I'll share the YouTube links for a few clips if you want to go into, looking at Venus and Mars energy through film. Um, but basically, I've been on this like 90s movie kick, and a lot of like 90s movies are like witchy and like occult like, especially because it was just Halloween and that's like what was coming up. But it recommended to me this like 2006 film of like a remake of Bewitched, and I was started watching it, and one of these fight scenes came up. And so for, just to narrate what happened, if you're not going to go watch the YouTube clip, though if you want to do that, great, that makes me happy. But basically, it's so hard for me to remember people's names in movies. Someone Bigelow, the female character that's playing Samantha in this remake of Bewitched, she just tells off her co-star. And she's been she hasn't stood up for herself yet. There's been some discontent or some realization brewing that she had been naive about the situation, and she's starting to see some of his behavior in a more clear light. And so she just tells him off, and there's crew people around, and he looks really, or like people on the crew just kind of look awkward. Like that kind of like adjusting their tie kind of energy. And they're like, they're just trying to like go on. But he's sitting there, the person who's just been told off, and he's like, I feel like I just was stripped bare and she just stuck the knife in, and he's like transformed by the situation. So I think, that has been getting me to think about the way when I've been seeing in films these really strong kind of romantic protagonist stories, it's like you get two people who have a very strong perspective at some point, um, and they clash, and that quality of two people like being in their own energy and clashing and having a transformation as a result, of the, the rigidity of their ego or seeing something from another perspective, that can only happen if the one who's sensitive and perceiving something that the other can't see speaks up and says it. So I think that that can be a very kind of Venus Mars dynamic, this like kind of confrontation in love or in relationship. And then he's super like, whoa, like I just got talked to like that. And he goes and chases after her and he's like, that was incredible that you were just so upfront and honest. And he's like suddenly smitten as a result. And then as a variation on this theme, since I'm talking about like film scenes and kind of Venus Mars energy, when both characters are angry, so not just one, there can be this vicious exchange of words until one or both people break into tears, soften, and then apologize. And so I thought of the scene from A Marriage Story, if you've seen that, and I'm also leaving the link to that clip in the notes. So just like the image of flowers that come with thorns, there is a gnarlier or thornier side to relationship that comes from the expression of discord. In our lives, there's something to be said for the courage that it takes to live within and to defend one's values as opposed to folding. And I think that this is interesting. It's like maybe from a more codependent stance, we're just trying not to rock the boat. And so if there's conflict, we're kind of willing to just overly compromise and we don't want to lose the connection or something like that. Versus when you're willing to stand up for and defend what you value, even though there's consequences to that. But I think that in connections that that bond is there, it's a healthy connection or whatever, there's often a sense of coming together through that difference. So we have to know what we desire or know who we are to make these stances, and it can be through relationships and conflict in relationship that we learn these lessons. This is the classic Aries Mars dialectic too. It's like Aries is self-awareness and self-knowledge, I am energy, and Libra is that through the other, through the mirror, through connection. And so through the mirror, through connection, we're going to learn about who we are. And when we know who we are, it changes how we relate. And there's this back and forth between those energies constantly co-evolving each other, unless, of course, one gets really stagnant and then you have like a stagnant back and forth between the two, which can always happen. So reflect on how you see the interplay this week between the deepest vulnerability of the heart and the types of protection that constellate as a result. Do you feel like there is a balance between the openness of your heart and the protection that you create around your heart? And have you tended to be underly or overly guarded? And on the same day, later, 9:12 p.m., so let's see what day this is again. November 9th. We have the sun in 18 degrees of Scorpio, trine Neptune, retrograde, and 18 degrees of Pisces. 9:12 p.m., sun trine Neptune. This transit may highlight some of the magical or redemptive qualities that emerge when we face our material. So whatever we have put into shadow. It may also be that if we enter altered states of consciousness, so however you do that, some people do that through meditation or through trance. Some people do that through plant medicine, whatever it is where you're like, I'm clearly in an altered state. Some people just go there naturally or like live in that state if they have maybe strong Pisces or Neptune energy anyway. So when you're in that altered state, there can be deep oceanic themes and memories and feelings that come through this week in particular, because it's Sun and Scorpio, trine Neptune and Pisces. Like how emotional and washing machine energy is that. I've been tuning into that energy a little bit of late, of just kind of feeling when those states come up where it's like, oh, I'm in an oceanic state. Okay. And like, how, what's our relationship to that? Do we think it's a problem that we need to like regulate? And I'm like, I love regulation. That's great. But there's also certain times where we're just in it, and resisting being in it only makes it worse. And so, how can we just surrender to the feelings that come up? Regulation is great for like having that as a skill set and knowing how to kind of have a daily baseline or something. But there's still things that happen, or like spikes of drama in life, or something that we're particularly anxious about, or something, and we'll be in that kind of spin cycle. And the spin cycle can also be ecstasy, like you can just be like in complete rapturous joy and ecstasy, and that's also spin cycle. And you could vacillate between them wildly, it just really depends. I wonder who relates to that. If you do, let me know in the comments. And Mercury re-enters Scorpio on November 10th at 1:55 p.m. Pacific. So Mercury, now direct, re-enters the sign of Scorpio. Mercury leaves post-retrograde shadow on November 19th and will leave Scorpio on December 1st. Mercury in Scorpio is like a deep sea diver, a detective, or a very vertical rabbit hole into the underworld of the psyche. This can be our curiosity to trace ideas or phenomena to their roots. At a psychological level, this can relate to unearthing the origin of particular beliefs or biases that we hold, and engaging with some transformative or alchemical process of transforming it at its root. So maybe you've had, whenever you have a belief, like a belief about, if this thing happens, then this. If I let myself fall in love, then this will happen. Or if I make the, income that I desire, then I will be this kind of person. And really assessing what beliefs we have are limiting or negative. And then further than that, it's like, where does this even come from? Can you recall the first time you felt that way? And then kind of teleport back to that moment and rewrite it, which is a really shamanic, powerful thing to do. You can rewrite it in a visualization, you can write a story, but doing some kind of cathartic activity to change the past is high magic. And there can be some empowerment in transcending the material conditions. So the literal circumstances are material conditions of our past. So we might think that because something happened in our early life, that we must always carry its scars. But it's not just the thing that happened, it's our deep emotional entanglement with it. So changing the story on an imaginative level, such as through some of those techniques I mentioned, or doing cathartic shamanic activities to clear the old story, are ways to step more fully into our personal power. Scorpio relates to the experience of how we will be exceptionally attracted or allured to certain people, books, teachings, experiences, etc. Because information or codes are present and we feel that they can help us exceed past our limitations. So when you feel a charge, an excitement, or a turn on about something you are in contact with, take a moment to notice that. It's one of the ways that the soul speaks to us. The Scorpio archetype and the soul and Pluto, like there's this desire to expand past limitations. And there's so much that we can do by ourselves, Taurus polarity, self-reliance. And then there's also this sense of like a glowing book and it seems so powerful. And when we read it, we feel alive and we're like, there's something here that I need to engage with. Deep part of that, and that's chemistry too. That comes up. That can be, I I wish I had the exact Instagram post so I could quote the person, but it's something that I saw. Um, but they were basically bringing up the point of like, why are you looking for a chill relationship where you don't feel very much, where it just feels very safe? Maybe you've had, dramatic, volcanic relationships in the past and you're just like playing it safe now. And the person was making the argument that chemistry, that spark, is a signal that there's something transformative or there's like some material there that draws you to that situation. And so to honor that. And I think that Scorpio shares this quality with Leo of being a kind of dramatic sign. It's not the first stereotype that people go to with Scorpio, but Scorpio can be very dramatic. We say it's extreme. So all this to say, how do you relate to that allurement? And I think that, if you do go too far with it, there is such a thing as like trauma bonding of like being in tumultuous connections where, you have the most roller coastery of emotions. And because of this roller coaster, you have all these cathartic, transformative experiences. And maybe you do want to take it down a notch. You're like, this isn't functional or this isn't stable. But there is some kind of middle path, perhaps, where it's not just a complete. One of my teachers in the PCC program, Brian Swim, would talk about how we're not here to just live in bovine domesticity, that being calm and regulated isn't the goal, even though some spiritual practices or the way that we interpret them can make us feel that way of like, if I'll just be in this state of calm. Amazing to access that energy. Like, I'm all about that. But the actual, again, this was Brian Swim, like all of our cells have metabolisms. They're just each these furnaces. And it's through the constant creation of heat in our bodies that we stay alive. So there's also a function of aliveness that's important to consider. And this is the kind of Scorpio Taurus dialectic of stability within Taurus and the edge and the excitement of Scorpio. And likewise about, this deep attraction toward someone or something. This connects with the good that we can do in the world when we take our own lessons that we've learned and now embody and talk about them. We have codes to share too. I think that there's a way that, as a species, we share what we've learned with other beings. And for humanity, this can be like our deep formative experiences, our rites of passage, our hard-earned lessons, the ways that we've been through it and have transformed. It's like when you radiate that energy in your essence, regardless of whether or not you talk about it when you've done that deep transformative stuff. But if you talk about it and, a lot of, I think in terms of like internet presence and stuff and having a platform and sharing your story, it's like you can empower people with your knowledge and where you've come from. And it's part of being in community. So this is what I have for you for the week. Check out the links for the courses, the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, if you haven't studied with me before and you'd love to learn evolutionary astrology, and the Meteorite program for those of you who have studied with me and want to go deeper into your evolutionary astrology practice. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I'll see you soon.